Hi there, it's Jenny from the Sewing Palace in Helena, Montana. Today's inspirational project is making a cardigan. Let's get started. Let's go over the featured items for the project. You will need the pattern, which is called Fall in Love Cardigan. It's from Sew to Grow. The sizes go from extra small to 4XL. You also want a hemmer of some sort. I'm going to be using the longer hot hemmer, which is great for doing some hems along the bottom of the cardigan. She also has a wonderful tape measure that can be used just by yourself. It actually locks into position so you can put it around your body and then you touch a button and it cinches up to whatever you'd like to measure. So all those numbers can be secret because you can be measuring all by yourself. You'll need some needles. The needles that I'm using are a jersey needle for the knit fabric. I'm also using some knit stay tape, which is going to stabilize my seams. It comes in white and black. It's a 1/2 inch wide and it's 25 yards. You'll definitely have enough with that. A fabric friendly pen is very helpful. Then I always like to use some sort of starch alternative and put it in the atomizer bottle. Also for garments, there's a couple of things that are very helpful for garments. There are garment shears that when you cut, they can lay flat on the surface so that you can actuate the scissors and run along and cut your pattern out. The other thing that's nice for garments is a tube turner if you're going to make spaghetti straps, or this project has ties in it. So you can use the tube turner to turn those right side out. The other garment friendly item is a ham. So a ham is a hard ironing surface that you can put curved surfaces over or sleeves. It works great for getting nice pressing done. Then also the pattern tracing material. This one looks on screen probably to you that it's white, but it actually has red dots on it. So it's red dot pattern tracing material. So it allows you to preserve your patterns by cutting out the size that you want and keeping the original. Last but not least, an overlocker is a wonderful thing to have for finishing seams, and an overlocker generally will take large cones of thread. So we have all of those features. Collect all your goodies for your garment. Don't forget your fabric. Last but not least is the fabrics that you'll be using to sew your garment with. And so we have quite a few fabrics here. Many of these are from art galleries, so they're a very nice cotton spandex knit that you can use, and it works great for the cardigan. We have them in solid colors, a couple of prints, and then some neutral. All right guys, let's talk some sewing machines, threads, and needles. For my sewing machine, I'm going to do some basic construction with the sewing machine. I'm sewing on a Bernina 590. I've got a jersey needle in that's a 70-10 because my knit fabric is not very thick, so I don't have a really big needle. I'm also going to be using a walking foot, so knit fabric stretches a little bit, so I could use my dual feed or my walking foot. And you'll also want some nice quality thread. I'm going to be using polyester thread in the top and in the bottom that's a neutral color that kind of blends with my fabric. I'm going to be finishing my seams with an overlocker. So in the overlocker, I have jersey needles, and then I have 4 spools of a neutral colored thread to finish my seams. You can sew the entire garment together with an overlocker if you would like. If you do not have an overlocker, you can finish the seams with a pinking shear or an overlock stitch that's on your sewing machine. So don't fret, anyone can do this project. All right, let's get started with some of our supplies. For the Fall in Love cardigan, you need about 2.5 to 3.5 yards, depending on your size, of a fabric that has a little bit of stretch to it. So the recommended fabrics are a medium to lightweight jersey knit, a double knit, or an interlock twist yarn. So she has those recommendations on the pattern. You'll trace your pattern onto a pattern tracing material. All right, so when you open up your pattern, you have quite a few pieces. They come in size extra small all the way to 4XL. So if you want to preserve all these sizes, which is highly suggested, keep your basic pattern as one piece and then trace the size that you want to make onto a pattern tracing material. Then you'll cut it out. All right, let's start out by talking a little bit about the fabric. I've already picked my fabric. I picked an art gallery print. She does have great cutting diagrams for how to cut your pieces out, but the pieces that you'll need, I just want to review. I did pre-wash my fabric in warm water and then put it in the dryer to try to pre-shrink it as best as possible. And then I cut all my pieces out. So you'll need 2 pieces that are the band. So what happens with this piece is there's going to be 2 pieces, they get sewn together, and they actually make the front of the cardigan. So there's a folded edge in the front. So there's 2 pieces that are the band. I thought it might be fun to cut this out of a coordinating fabric so you can have a little accent in the front. So that's the band, 2 pieces. Then you'll also, if you want to do the tie, there's an optional tie, you'll need 2 pieces for that. And they're 2.5 by 20. There's not a pattern piece for that. So you can actually tie it in the front to create a waistline, or just tie it in the back to pull it back a little bit. Then you need a piece that is for the back. So it's 1 large piece. That's the wrong side of the fabric, and then you'll see the print here. So this is the back, so 1 of those. And then you'll have the front. So these ones will be a little more slender because you actually add that piece that's folded over on the edge. So this would go here with the fold over edge. So there's going to be 2 fronts that will be mirror images of each other. So you just want to be careful when you're cutting those. These are the only ones that you have to make sure you have the mirror image. She also talks about, if you have directional fabric, how to cut that out. And then of course you need 2 sleeves. So I've got 2 sleeves here that will go on the sides. When sewing with a stretch fabric, it is important to be using the correct stitch that will easily stretch with the fabric as it moves. So I would suggest using a zigzag stitch or a stretch stitch. On the sewing machine that I have in front of me, the Bernina 590, if you expand the screen, you can see that there is a stretch stitch already built into the machine. She also has the settings in the pattern, so if you don't have a machine that has a stretch stitch, you can adjust your zigzag stitch with the settings in the pattern. The next thing that you can do with a stretch fabric is to apply a seam tape to support all the edges of the fabric. This will give you a more professional finish and support the seamed edges so that it wears a lot better. This is the seam tape that you would apply. It is fusible and it goes to the wrong side of the fabric. So you lay it down so that the fusible is touching the wrong side of the fabric, and then you use an iron. You want it lying along the edge of the fabric but not over, as it will adhere to the surface. So you just work your way down the seam and apply heat or pressure at the same time to adhere it. You can turn corners with it or just cut it off so that you have a nice even edge of seam tape along all of the edges of your fabric. The first step is to sew the shoulder seams. You're going to be sewing all of the seams with 3/8 of an inch seam. So you'll pin the shoulder seams right sides together with the back facing up and the 2 front pieces facing down. So it'll be right sides together. You'll now sew using 3/8 of an inch seam along the top of your seam. Once you've sewn your shoulder seams, you'll want to finish this edge. You can either take a pair of pinking shears and finish the edge with the pinking shears. So that's what that would look like. So that's one option. Or you can go to your sewing machine and choose an overlocker stitch. Let me zoom in on that stitch. The overlocker stitch will be sewn along the seam side of the fabric to finish this edge. The way that I'm going to finish this seam today is on the Bernina L850 Air Thread Overlocker. Let's look at that next. For this seam, you have a few choices for an overlock stitch. You could do a 4-thread overlock stitch, so you will have 2 needles threaded and the 2 loopers threaded. That's the most secure stitch. Your other option is a 3-thread stretch stitch. To overlock your seam, I'll be using the blade as my guide. I'm going to run it along the edge of the fabric, just trimming off a little bit of fabric. I'll be using a 4-thread overlock stitch, which is 2 needles that are threaded and both loopers. Your next step is to attach the sleeves. This is the top shoulder seam, and I want to show you another gadget that I absolutely love. This is a scissor fob. It has ceramic blades in it. It's perfect for a fly fisherman, or it's also perfect for a sewist. So you can have this attached to your favorite gadget, and you can cut your threads with this wonderful thing, and there's no sharp edges that will hurt you. Now we're going to attach the sleeve so that it is on the top of the shoulder seam. What you'll do with the sleeve is you will fold it in half, and you will find the center point and find a fabric-friendly pen to mark that center point. Once you've marked your center on your sleeve, you'll lay that center point onto the seam of your shoulder that you have just sewn. You'll pin that in place. Next, you will pin each corner so that it matches up the side seams onto the garment. Then when you're sewing it, you will ease around that edge along the curve. When you're sewing the sleeve to the shoulder seam, you're going to be easing along the curve. So you're going to start with 3/8 of an inch seam along the edge where you've pinned, and you're going to secure that stitch. The next point that you have marked is that center seam along the shoulder. So these pieces are not flat, and you're going to work your way around, pulling them and making sure, not really pulling them hard, but making sure that they're even when they're fed into the machine. So it's going to take a fair amount of adjustment as you work your way around the sleeve, and I would suggest using the needle down function so that whenever you stop and readjust your fabric, your needle is secured in your fabric. So we're going to work our way around the sleeve. I'm going to overcast the edges on the sleeve now that I've got them sewn. I'm going to use the tailor's ham to then lay my curved sleeve over, and then I'll use a little bit of best press to flatten that seam. So I'll just work my way around the curve, and it fits nicely over the tailor's ham so that you can get a professional finish on your seam. So I'll get it over the ham, finger press it, then I'm going to apply a little best press starch and let that soak in and then press it. If you'd like to add the ties, this is the time that you will sew the ties. They're going to be long strips. You'll sew them right sides together along the long edge and then turn them right side out. So I'm going to do that to both ties. Once you've sewn your tube, the pattern says to leave both ends open. On my example, I actually sewed across the end so I have a finished edge, and I'm going to use this tube turner, which has a blunted end on one side, and then the blunted end sits into a little channel. You'll take the blunted end and feed it into the tube, collecting the fabric on one side of the tube. Once you get to the corner that's sewn, you'll then pinch it into place, and then you'll move the fabric over to the other side. Once you've revealed the other end, you'll pull it off the tube turner, and then voila, you have your tube that is turned right side out. After you've made your ties, you can tie a knot at the end to create a finished look. In the pattern, there is a measurement for where you will insert the tie, so you'll make sure that when you go to put your side seams together, you'll have that marking. Your next step is to sew the side seams. There is a great diagram in the pattern showing how to pin and what sequence to pin so that you get this edge all lined up with the seam inside the armpit, the bottom hem, and then the end of the sleeve. So we'll go ahead and insert the tie in between the layers and pin along that edge. I'll also take a photo of the picture in the pattern because she has a great diagram. Using your sewing machine, you will sew along the side seam. You can start in the armpit and sew down the side, and then go back and start from the armpit and work your way out. So that's the technique I will use. You can also start at one end and work your way all the way through, but I'm going to start at the armpit first. Once you have sewn your side seam, you can then overlock or finish the edges in a method of your choice. Doesn't that seam look beautiful? You'll repeat that for the other side seam by pinning it and then sewing it and then finishing the seam. We're coming around the back stretch of finishing our cardigan. I still have the band to attach, so I'm going to show you that next. What we're going to do for the next step will be hemming the bottom of the cardigan, then we'll attach the band, and then we'll hem the ends of the sleeves. So we're almost finished. Stay tuned for the next step. Now that we have the front of the garment mostly complete, we're going to hem the bottom edge using a 4-thread overlock. So I've already applied my seam tape to the bottom of the fabric, and then I'm just going to run along the bottom of the jacket to create a finished edge that then I can hem with my sewing machine, or I could also hem it using a cover stitch on a overlocker. I could also use a twin needle on my sewing machine. Today we're just going to overlock this edge, then we're going to take it to an ironing board and press it up, and then top stitch it with our sewing machine. We are ready for the next step of hemming the bottom of our garment. What I want to show you first is this ironing board. So this is the Laura Star ironing board. It produces amazing steam. It's also a dry micro steam. So what you'll achieve with that is incredibly flat seams and wonderful for garments. The other function that this has is the iron will either pull through air or push through air. So if you're working with a lightweight silk or something that you want to balloon up so that you don't actually press creases in it, this is a wonderful iron for that. So I've got a lightweight cotton batik on the ironing board, and you'll see it kind of balloons up. And so that's when the air is pushing out. Or the other function that you can use is you can touch the button, and I'm just touching the front here, and it's going to pull it down. So this function I like for quilting because it pulls my block. Micro steam, not super hot, but you can also get a really nice amount of steam onto a project and get some creases out of it. So we're going to be using the Laura Star iron to hem our garment. We're at the point that we're going to be hemming the bottom of our garment using the Laura Star iron and a hot hemmer. I've chosen the hot hemmer that's a little bit longer because I'm going to be going long distances. This surface is iron friendly and has measurements on it so that you can get a perfect hem. There's also a smaller one that has a curved corner to be able to work around corners or insets or miters. So I'm going to be using this hot hemmer, and you're going to fold your fabric up to the measurement, and this is going to be 1/2 inch. So I'm going to work my way around using the iron and hemming it with the hot hemmer and the Laura Star. You'll continue this process till you get the whole bottom of the garment hemmed. We've reached the point where we're ready to hem. So we've already overlocked the edge, we've used the seam tape, and then we used an iron and a hot hemmer to get an accurate 1/2 inch hem. Then we're going to stitch along the bottom to hold it in place. The other technique that you can do is you can use a double needle, which would require 2 top threads. And what you do with the double needle is you sew just a straight line or a small zigzag, and it will form 2 equidistant lines of stitching. So that's an option for you. Today I'm going to just be using a single needle, and we're going to hem along the bottom. I'm going to be using the measurements on my stitch plate as a guide so that I run the folded edge of my fabric along the measurement on my stitch plate and hem the bottom. The next step is to make and attach the band. You'll sew the band pieces together by lying them right sides together. You will pin along the short end and sew with 3/8 inch seam. What you will yield is a long band piece that is the full length of the two pieces. We'll then press that so that the seam lays flat, and then you're going to fold it in half lengthwise, wrong sides together. After you've sewn the band in one long strip, you're going to fold it in half lengthwise, right sides together, and you're going to stitch along each short end of the band with 3/8 of an inch seam. After sewing the short ends of the band, turn it right side out and press. All right, I've got this laid out on my office floor. I wanted to show you. So the front is all hemmed and ready to go, and my band is ready to attach to that. There is a seam at the top of the band, and you're going to take that and you're going to pin it to the center of the neckline. So it's going to go attached to the center. Next, you will pin the finished edge of the band to the finished edge of the cardigan, which is down at the bottom, and you will pin that. Then you will pin your way all the way around up to this pin and do the same thing for the opposite side. Be generous applying your pins so that the edges of the fabric are evenly distributed and you do not have any puckers. Then take it to your sewing machine and baste it in place. I'm almost finished with my basting stitch, and it looks like it's going to fit really well, lining up with the center seam in the back and also with the ends that are finished already. So at this point, to finish that raw edge, you'll take it to your overlocker, which we'll do next. So if you're needing to adjust, this is a great time to adjust it, because with a basting stitch, it's easier to rip out. But this is fitting really well, so I think we're ready to overlock this edge, and we'll be done with our cardigan. I'm so excited. I'm going to finish this cardigan in just a few seconds. Coming around to the other side. Sew off a chain of stitches, and then I'll leave that chain relatively long using my cool little cutter, and then I'm going to take a chenille needle and pull that chain through the channel on each end. I'm at the very end where I have a chain of stitches from the overlocker, and an overlocker doesn't do a reverse stitch, so in order to secure these, you can tie them in a knot and then pull them back through the channel. So first I'm going to try to get the knot real close to the base, and then I will pull it through the channel. If you want to skip tying the knot, you can pull it through the channel, and then the other thing that would be pulled back through the channel of stitches, I'll show you that, and then you go back and forth with your sewing machine to secure those stitches. So after looking at it, that's what I think I'm going to do. There's a few tools that you could use. What you want to do is have a needle or a bodkin. A chenille needle is a pretty large needle. It has a large eye. Now remember, we have 4 threads at the end of this chain, so we need to get 4 threads through the eye of the needle. So it needs to be a large enough needle that it'll hold 4 threads, but also small enough that it'll fit through the channel. So if I feed this one, you can see I'll be able to feed it through pretty well, and then I'll fish the threads through. There's a steel needle, which it would be easy to get that into all the threads. It's a little bit tighter getting it through the channel. And then the other option is a bodkin. So this is a version of a bodkin. It's B-O-D-K-I-N. They're wonderful for pulling elastic through things, all kinds of little gadgets. So I'm going to feed this through, thread the threads through the opening at the end of the bodkin, and then I'll pull it back through. So the bodkin is through, and then these threads are going to go through the bodkin. So the threads are now through. Now I'm going to gently pull that bodkin back through the channel so the threads come back through the channel. Then I'll go to my sewing machine and go reverse over that just to hold those all in place. Then I can snip these close. All right, we did it. We made a cardigan. The last step would be hemming the sleeves. So you want to put that on. You can overlock them and then just fold them up with a hot hammer and stitch them down. But here it is. There's the back with an optional tie. Voila! This is Jenny from the Sewing Palace. Bye-bye.